All right, so let's get started. I'm really excited to see the demo because I've seen so much work that's being done.
You said
So
demos, but what demos?
demo what you have so far, like your progress, especially like this past week, the amount of design that you're doing. I've seen some of the code merges. I thought that was really cool. So it doesn't have to be fully fleshed out, but just anything you want to show and that you're excited about.
Dana, do you want to go first, or?
Sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. It was just like a question mark above my head, and now there's no question mark. So let's do it. Okay. As a group, let's see if I can get to the top page. Viviana opened a board on Figma so that we could share our ideas about what we wanted the app to look like. So I'm going to try and get it to a zoom ratio that we can see little bits of where it started. So this is what the mood board started with, and we contributed to this. Rafa, myself, and Viviana contributed, and we put in like what we thought we might want it to look like. So the look and feel of the app. And Viviana and Rafa had experience with Figma before, and I didn't. All I had was a login. So this was like a eye opener for me in terms of how to select things and just put things up on the board. We ended up really liking this icon here, this image of this person that's shopping and adding things to their list. And we ended up using that for our logo. The font we chose was Poppins, and we just got ideas off of what the three of us were drawn to and liked. And so we would add comments to what we thought about the typography, what we thought about colors, and there were some contributed color palettes. And then we had a meeting together and talked through what our preferences were, what we liked and didn't like, and what we would be willing to move forward with, which was a really good collaborative discussion. We found that some of us had opinions on colors, and maybe, colors were important to someone else. Some, like, I really liked a certain orange button, but nobody else really cared about that. So we had different things that we cared about, and we tried to incorporate everyone's perspective in the design. I'm going to try and get to where we can see it. Okay. So there were some tools added to the wireframe. So the wireframe kit was here. And then when we met for the first iteration, Viviana drove and we kind of built out each page. So we had the home page and desktop view, and then the add item view. This is where we started. And then the list view. So that was kind of our first pass. And then we met again and we each took a piece of that and kind of put our own touches on it. So we divided these views out into three, and then we met again after we did our work. And so Rafa had the homepage view and mocked it up here. And then I had the add item view. And then we were trying to put components of each other's styling throughout to make the app look cohesive. So this was our second pass. And then Viviana had the list view. And she was kind enough to put like different options for colors and what things looked like. And then we went through again and met as a team. And we went through and made decisions. And I think this was I don't want to say a really good conversation again, but it was an example of us working effectively together, because we all had opinions about things, but we were gracious enough to say, you know what, we do need to get this done in a particular time frame. If I don't have an objection to something, we're going to go ahead and approve it as long as the app looks the way that we agreed that we wanted it to look, so that all of our kind of all of our style was incorporated into one. So you see from the second iteration to the third iteration, we changed some colors a bit. We went with a different style on the right-hand side, more black and white. And then on the add item view, we added colors for the buttons and that big orange button that I'm fond of. And then the list view, which has this neat feature of like the strip on the left that indicates the color, which I think is pretty cool. And so after we met then and discussed as a team, we split out the issues into, we met with Tanner in office hours and got some suggestions on how to proceed with writing the issues, like what that would look like, how we could split it out, what our options were. And a component library was suggested. So we decided to go with that. So we met on, I think it was either Thursday or Friday, and decided to split the work out into the components we wanted to work on. So I got a grouping of components, Rafa got a grouping of components, and Viviana got a grouping. And so we all started on, I think it was Friday, of writing our individual issues and starting our draft pull request for the individual components. And then work just started from there. And that's kind of where we are at this point. I know that I've pushed a first pass pull request for this button here. Rafa's pushed a couple, Viviana's in progress, but we're all kind of, we made a tentative deadline to check in with each other on Monday. Now that I've been working on the components for a little bit, that may not be a thing, at least in terms of my perspective. I didn't know like hiding the functionality of a radio button, making it look like a regular button would be more complicated than I thought. But there, a lot of good development learning has been happening. And we've been working with each other in terms of, you know, we all have different schedules, but we're working async and meeting up also. And that seems to be going well. What do you think, Rafa?
I think you did an amazing demo, so thank you.
I agree.
Very, very impressed. And can I get y'all to design my home site? Because that is very professional. Like the Figma stuff, your thought process, how you talk me through it, and then just seeing like the difference between when you started out as like wireframes, the black and white, that was really smart thing to do, and then narrowing down as you go, like that was like very awesome to see.
Yeah, I will say it was great to have Viviana, who has experience with design, because she helped drive the entire process for us.
Agree.
Yeah, it sounds like I love the part where Dana's like, we each have opinions and we're gracious, and we had lots of conversations and we're gracious about like how to kind of narrow that down, and how each person like care about something, then let's let that person have it, you know. So it's really it shows how well you're working together, and I can see like I can't wait until next week in your final demo when all this comes together.
Yeah, very impressive. I was surprised that by the time on our office hours, you all had so much work done already. I was like, oh my, like you showed me all those Figma stuff and it happened so quick. It was impressive.
I also want to acknowledge that it's only the three of you that are doing this work. So that in itself, good job in navigating that, right? Like this is pretty common, like things will happen. Sometimes one of our coworker will have to be gone for a while, then what happens, you know? And like it didn't stop any of you to just like keep going. So that's like really impressive.
Yeah, it does happen in the real world, right? Like people go on vacations or out unexpectedly. We tried to hold a space so that if everybody wanted to participate, they could, but at some point we have to move forward. So like, if you can join, please do. If you can't, we're just going to keep trucking.
Yep, that's a great mindset. And if they have opinions later, we can always file an issue.
Cool. Yeah, nice work.
Any other comments or anything you'd like to share?
just say ditto to what was already said. And apologies for the, I'm trying to set up my extra monitors for the presentation. I had forgotten to do that before the call.
Mhm. Is there any, I guess this is my final question. Is there any challenges in terms of working on individual PRs and then merging and code reviewing that?
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
I think it's because we all work hard. We all keep different schedules, but we all are grinding. So I think we trust each other to know that when the other person can do it, they're going to do it. So at least that's how I feel about it. Like I have that level of trust with my teammates that, you know, when they're working, absolutely, that's going to get reviewed. No worries.
I agree.
So just a mental note, journal that for your job interviews. Journal this experience and make sure you use it as something to showcase your skills and your communication skills and how well you work with others.
I think those Figma presentations will impress a lot of people for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all I have. Rob, are you ready for the presentation?
I think so. Let me get my screen up here. Okay. And my Zoom stuff moved. All right, so this is our final learning module. And we're going to be talking about accessibility. You've hit some of this already with some of the AC in the issues, things like making sure that the label of the group of the category of the items in the list is available to screen readers. But there's more to accessibility than just screen readers. And so we're going to talk through a few different kinds of accessibility. Maybe before we get into it too far, how familiar, I guess, do you feel specifically, Dana and Rafa, with the topic of accessibility? Is it something that you think you've covered in boot camps, or you've looked into a lot on your own, or is it still kind of a new topic to you?
New topic to me.
Yeah, it's still pretty new. I'm familiar with a little bit of it, but not too much practice.
Yeah. So, and honestly, it's not my one of my fortes. So everybody in development is going to have specialties in different areas, and accessibility is something that it's always worth getting better at. But it could be that in your role in the future, you don't deal a ton with user-facing development, and that's fine. But it's good to have a handle on some of the things that are needed and helpful to people who have disabilities. All right, so accessibility. You may have seen it abbreviated as A11Y. I've heard some people pronounce that as ally. I usually, when I'm reading it, will just say accessibility. I don't think it's wrong either way. Ally is actually, it's kind of a cool pun, I guess, on the word accessibility. And the numbers there come from the fact that there are 11 letters in between A and Y in accessibility. You'll see that kind of convention pop up in other places, like internationalization is sometimes abbreviated I18N for 18 letters between I and N. And there are some other ones like that. I think localization might be an 11. Anyway, so accessibility, ally, or A11Y, same thing. Oh, I hit yeah, that's not the right button. All right, so from Wikipedia, web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites on the World Wide Web by people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. When sites are correctly designed, developed, and edited, generally all users have equal access to information and functionality. The W3C maintains a working group dedicated to web accessibility and publishes related standards. In the US, Section 508 requires government agencies to make websites accessible to people with disabilities. Something that I was familiar with recently is that there is a regulation passed in Canada as well. I don't know if it was Ontario. I think it was Ontario specifically. Recently, that required sites to achieve, I believe, WCAG AA standard of accessibility. Basically, if you were serving people in Ontario and for websites, you don't know who you're going to be serving. So it kind of had ripple effects across the entire internet as companies scrambled to make sure that they were compliant with these standards, which is a good thing. So we're talking about giving people equal access. I think it's interesting that it calls out here socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. Sometimes we think of accessibility as just like your physical ability to interact with something on the screen, but making your page light enough that it doesn't take a long time to download, or if there are long downloads that are part of your page, they aren't necessary in order for the information that's on the page to be available. So also looking at internet speeds. Some people with disabilities access websites using assistive technologies, including screen readers, screen magnifiers, speech input, assistive keyboards, braille displays. Popular screen readers include NVDA and JAWS on Windows, and VoiceOver, which is built into Mac OS. I'm not a Windows person, but I have tested with VoiceOver, and it's generally pretty good. And sometimes it depends on how well the browser works with these technologies. But for the most part, you are wanting to test with one of these screen readers if you are looking to give your site kind of an accessibility audit. Has anybody, I guess, quick poll again, has anybody ever used any of these three things to see how they work? Okay. The first time you turn them on, they might be a little bit annoying as someone who doesn't need them, because it's going to like read to you, and it generally, if you're not like looking at the screen and trying to go off just the instructions and so forth, it's going to be a lot slower of a way to interact with something. But turning that on and feeling that and getting a feel for that technology is very useful. So we talked about the what, why. So the first point there, which I think is good for to be at the top, is the right thing to do to provide equitable access to information. Going back to browser or internet speed, of course, if you are providing something that in space weighs a lot, a movie or something like that, there are going to be people who have different access ability to that information. But it's talking about access to information, not necessarily to resources. So if you had a tutorial video that you're putting on your site, maybe you could also include a transcript, for example. Let's see, you may be legally obligated to make your website accessible. Again, these slides will be available afterwards, so all these links can click into those. More people in the US access, this is very interesting, access websites using assistive technology than live in Canada. Some estimate that 20% of website visitors have some sort of disability. Making your pages more accessible for people with disabilities makes them more accessible for everyone. This one is really interesting, and I think we're going to get into it here on the next slide. But sometimes there's a kind of a mental picture of what a disabled person is like. Maybe they're deaf, or they or blind, or whatever. But it's not just those with permanent disabilities and permanent drastic, perhaps, disabilities. There are lots of ways that accessibility can be useful to people with even lesser disabilities, which kind of opens the spectrum to a wider audience. So this graph talks kind of outlines that a little bit. We talked about the disability of touch. There might be somebody who doesn't have an arm, and they are, can only use one hand, or maybe they can't use their hands for some reason. But there might also be somebody who just broke their arm, right? And they didn't, they never had to interact with things in this kind of way before, and now they're discovering all of the ways that things are not accessible to them. Or someone, or a new parent, is the situational column. Someone who's in this just very brief situation, and they're trying to do this thing, and it's harder, right? Because they are less able to do the things that they normally are able to do. And there's some of these for each of these different kinds of abilities. The ability to hear clearly, ability to see. Seeing, honestly, is something that I think has started to hit people who would consider themselves not even disabled, but it's almost a nicety to be able to lessen the strain on your eyes. For example, if a website has high contrast, you can turn your brightness down, but you can still read it, things like that, to be able to make your technology both more accessible, but also easier and healthier for people to use. Okay, so it says we use this personic spectrum to understand related mismatches and motivations across a spectrum of permanent, temporary, and situational scenarios, a quick tool to help foster empathy and to show how a solution scales to a broader audience. That's another thing to think about when you're looking at this is, what kind of situation might you see yourself in where one of these senses would be restricted for you? If you are, it gives the example of a bartender there where it's loud and they can't really hear very well. I'm sure there are situations you would find yourself in where you're wanting to use something, but it's loud outside or loud in that space. Or you don't have the ability to look. Hopefully, I don't know why distracted driver is the example. It doesn't seem like a very good example, I guess. There are other reasons that you might not be looking at the at a screen than driving. But so finding ways that or reasons that you might start to enable accessibility services. All right, and so then getting into some of the how. Number one is, and two are probably the most common pieces of advice. Use valid semantic HTML, and that means having an understanding of how your page should be structured and how the flow of your content should exist. Because when your screen, despite the name, the screen reader is not literally reading the screen, it is going into the page source behind the screen and trying to understand what's there. Now, there might be some screen readers may have become advanced enough to take some rendering into account, or different things that they can do more than just look at your HTML. But it starts with this. It starts there with HTML. And so if the the order of things in your HTML makes sense if you're just reading it yourself, then it will probably make sense to a screen reader. ways that you can mess this up would be like using absolute positioning to stick something that's here over here, which might be fine for a sighted user, but if that movement is very meaningful and important, then the person who is only hearing it read to them is not going to have that context. Always include alt attributes on your image tags. Again, screen readers cannot read the content of the image, but they can tell you what the alt tag says. ARIA attributes, this quote over here on the side, the best ARIA is no ARIA at all. I don't remember what ARIA stands for, but I'm sure one of the words is accessibility. And it basically means that you can take elements in your HTML and describe them to be something else. And whenever you can avoid doing that, it's better, because you can, there's less to remember for one, and which means there's less to forget, and there is the screen, it will be more compatible most likely with more screen readers, because ARIA labels continue to be introduced and to help with some of these things, but very basic semantic HTML is pretty accessible straight out of the gate. Number 4 there, ensure all content is reachable via keyboard. Ensure content and tab ordering makes sense. Use sufficient color contrast. Don't use only color to signify state. So you may have seen apps or things that provide labels, and there might be a color label, but then there will also be like an associated shape, like a triangle, or maybe it will have a striped background or a checkered background or something like that, to allow people who are colorblind to be able to distinguish between the different labels, if those labels are meaningful. Or even better would be text labels, if you need to communicate specific meaning with your labels. All right, so this has been going a little bit fast, but I'm trying to get to a demo so we can look at some of the how this plays out. So again, continuing on how, identifying accessibility issues for remediation. There are automated tools, so Axe, and you can actually put these into pipelines in GitLab or GitHub, so that your PR is blocked from being merged until the things are resolved. But as the comment there says, it doesn't cover everything. It'll catch some things, but not everything. Guided audits, such as what's built into accessibility insights. We're going to look at that in a minute. And then audits by accessibility testers by companies such as Fable Tech Labs. So hiring, if your company is able to hire someone to come in and do an accessibility audit of your site, then that's often easier and faster than trying to become an expert in it immediately yourself. Having that expert come in and kind of help you and guide you would be useful. All right, I sped through a lot of that. Any questions before we get into our demo? Okay, so let me exit this one. Am I still sharing the screen?
Yep, the entire screen.
Perfect. So pull this window and take a look at accessibility insights. So accessibility insights, I think I might have closed the actual link. They have a website that's linked here in that. I can open that really quick. Linked in the slides that you'll have access to. So they have a couple other tools, Windows, Linux, and Mac desktop tools to test Android accessibility. one for to test Windows applications. We're obviously looking at the web, and that's going to be through the Chrome extension that they provide, or in my case, I'm using Brave, which allows Chrome extensions to be installed. So I have it installed up here in the corner, and they have a few different things. There's a 3-minute video you can watch to get introduced. This fast pass is maybe one of the quickest ways to get an idea of what the tool provides. So you can see here it's targeting this tab over here that I have open. This is just a Chrome extension tab. And they have some examples of things that tests that have failed. So one of them is a required attribute, and then the rest of them are color contrast. So if you come over here to the actual tab, you can see that they've highlighted the area of focus with this red box and exclamation point. And if you click on that, it'll give you information about the failure, what to do. You can read more about it. So WCAG, there's a whole lot that you can read. You can, yeah, so some other stuff. But this is what it's suggesting, is adding the required attribute, presumably because it doesn't make sense to enter this form without having entered something, right? Let's see what this actually looks like though in the HTML. So you can see we've got class, max length, autocomplete. So they have several ARIA labels on here. Autofocus. They don't have, so this is actually something I'm showing my ignorance here. I would have just said this, required. And that usually will indicate that, or you could do required equals true. That would usually indicate that you can't submit the form. What this is saying is suggesting is ARIA required attribute. So let's see what that is. Required ARIA attributes must be provided. An ARIA role attribute can be added to an element to instruct assistive technologies to treat it as something other than its type. I should have done a little bit more research on this one. Feel free to read some of this on your own. I actually quickly skimming this and not able to understand what this in particular is saying. It says required ARIA attributes must be provided. It sounds like
I have a little bit here. It says, unfortunately, there's a lack of consistency in how browsers treat HTML5 required property, making it unpredictable and therefore unreliable. That's what this blog post about, I can share it here.
Well, good to know. It doesn't seem like that's what this description is saying. It sounds like this is like a meta tag to say that you need other ARIA labels, but maybe it's just worded strangely.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, this is far from the subject I'm knowledge in. So
for a list of roles and their required attributes, see ARIA in HTML. Okay. Anyway, so you can do this on your own. Go to google.com, install the extension, and see and look into it. This one at the bottom, I'm a little bit more comfortable talking about, which is color contrast. So all of these are gray text on a gray background, and it's saying that they have a contrast of 4.15. So there's another tool that I use a lot. It's a color contrast tool from webaim.org. And this is like I do some like light design work on the side. My wife has a piano studio, and I did kind of like a color palette for her website and things like that. And so when I'm doing stuff like that, and very, very related to what you all just talked about with the color palette for your site, I want to come in and find colors that will work together well, look good together, but also have high contrast. And so I usually start with kind of like an idea of what colors I want to use, and then I'll come and paste those hex values in here and see how they rank. So for example, they like when you first load it, they've got this color here, full blue, no red or green, and then it's on white. And this has a contrast ratio of 8.6 almost, which passes all of the tests. So there are 2 levels for WCAG. Well, I think there are 3, but AA and AAA are usually the ones that are talked about. AA has lower requirements. So if I made this a lighter blue, you can see that it fails AAA for normal text, but it passes AAA for large text. So what that means is this color is like the color contrast for this text on this background isn't quite good enough if you have kind of like small regular text, but if you have large or bold text, then it's okay. And so there are different breakpoints for all of these. This one is 7. So if you have a color contrast of 7 or higher, then it will pass all of the tests. I think the next one down is 4.5. If your color contrast is less than 4.5, then it fails AAA level for both normal and large or bold text. But it passes AA, large text, fails AA, small text. And then there's one more breakpoint lower that hopefully is never crossed, which is 3. If it's less than 3, it basically fails everything, including things that are not text. So if it's over 3, that's acceptable for things that are not text, that you're basically highlighting a box or whatever, graphical components. You don't need to actually read that. You just need to be able to see that it is there. But below 3 fails everything. So in this case, we had over here on Google, we had 4.15. So that would have been somewhere like this-ish, which isn't great. It passes for AA large text, but if you look at the text here, that's not large text. It's neither bold nor large. And so this would not be passing the color contrast accessibility standards. And it doesn't, even if it were both of those, it wouldn't pass the AAA, which is the higher recommendation. I mentioned earlier the Act in Ontario. I believe the requirement was that websites conform to the AA level. But if you can shoot for AAA, I basically try to shoot for 7 or higher because I don't have to worry about how big my text is. It will always contrast enough. And then, and I've just been sliding this blue back and forth on the lightness scale. You can put in other colors. Let's do an orange here. So this is a very bad orange to use on white. You can also flip these. So if you wanted it's the same thing, but if you wanted to see what it looks like, and you said FF9900, so you had an orange background, but white text. It's the exact same contrast ratio, but this might give you an idea of what it would look like on your site if you're using a button, for example. And then you can, if you're trying to get your contrast up, you can push the slider until it gets to the point that you want it to be at, and then you can use that color. Now, if you're going for an orange button, this is probably not the color you're going for. It's not exactly orange anymore. So there are other things that you might want to do. Maybe instead of making the color dark, you stick with a light background, but you switch your text to be black, right? And that will pass all of our accessibility standards and give you enough contrast. I spent a lot of time on this tool. You can play with it. It's just something I liked playing with because I like colors. But that's far from the only thing to be concerned about with accessibility. It is the only remaining thing on this page as for the FastPass test, though. So let's come back here. We had this FastPass window open. Then another tool that they have is tab stops. If you turn on visual helper. So if I come in here and I just press tab, All right, so you can see over here, I think the blue is probably Google's highlighting, the red is the tool. And it's kind of just highlighting where your tab is. But the other thing is that as you keep tabbing, it's going to draw you a picture basically of how your tab activity moves from one element to the next. And so you can kind of use this to gauge, does this order make sense, right? Now, if I was coming from here down to here, over to here, you know, it wouldn't be something that makes very much sense. Generally left to right and then down the page, just like you would read, is a good idea. Although it depends on how much you have on your page and what you want people to be able to do. So there are other controls than tab to be able to navigate with the keyboard. You can look more into that, arrow keys in particular. And screen readers will also usually have their own shortcuts that will let you navigate within a page using just your keyboard. But if you can, even just as a, like, people who really like to navigate from the keyboard, they might not even be disabled, they just really like to do it. They can get frustrated if your tab order is all messed up. This is an interesting one I did earlier. It like came up here, but it's down here. I think there's something that they're drawing off screen, which is interesting. So that's the tab order. And then a section here needs review, things that might be problems, but really just need you to take a look at them. And they didn't have anything to talk about here. So that's one tool. Oh, and there are other parts here. So you can get a bit more into detail about the entire website if you wanted to look at. So if you want to kind of hone into a specific aspect of accessibility, it says here there are no matching or failing instances for links functioning as something else. For example, timed events. Anyway, you can kind of get a better idea of all the things that are available to you. One last tool that wasn't mentioned in the slides, or at least maybe it's on the last resources page, I'm not sure, is Google Lighthouse. So you can access that from your should do that from the actual page here. From the developer tools, it's the last tab. So usually it's like down here at the bottom under the chevron. And you can decide what you want it to look at. So you can look at performance. And as we talked about before, performance can be, you know, an aspect to accessibility, although it's not usually the first thing that people talk about when they talk about accessibility. So you can generate a report. Warming up. So they did you could tell it did a little bit there with mobile view as well. And then it'll give you a score. So out of 100, this google.com scored a 75. Talks about a couple of ARIA roles, or ARIA attributes. Some of the things that have roles do not have the required ARIA attributes. Lists contain elements other than list item elements. That's an interesting one. So lots of things to you can look at here. Similar to Axe and other things that are programmatic and automated, Lighthouse is not going to catch everything. There's actually, I forget where I saw it, but there was something going around about like the most inaccessible web page in the world, and it got a 100% rating on accessibility, like the accessibility tab in Lighthouse, basically because the developer went in and tweaked it to be completely inaccessible while tricking Lighthouse into thinking that it was accessible. The point was to prove that your automated tools are not going to catch everything. And so you need to do some manual testing and interact with your page like a user would. Okay, I talked really fast for quite a while. Anybody have comments or questions or things to add?
That's a lot. It's a lot of material and a lot to look into.
Yeah. So I guess maybe as a thing to say for like next steps would be, even if you wanted to take this back to the Smart Shopper app and run Lighthouse on it, or run the Accessibility Insights extension, and just pick a couple of things that it finds to fix and see those things go away, just to get a little bit of practice with it, and also an idea of what it's going to be looking at and looking for. Don't think you're going to be able to hire a accessibility company to come in and do an audit of your app, and you probably wouldn't have time to fix everything they found if you did. That said, the simpler the page is, the more accessible it's probably going to be. And so the less things you can try to stuff into one view, the less you have to worry about how hard it is to find the thing that you're looking for without looking at the screen. Okay, we'll turn it back to issues person.
Well, issues this week is the same as last week, right?
Oh,
We are just I am assigned issues, and I went and checked, and I was like, there aren't issues. So if y'all keep up what you're doing, I think we're right on track. If there's anything you need from us, we're always on the Slack channel, but it seems like you got a good path forward and a lot of progress made already. So I imagine the plan is still to either mob together or keep up your consistent ways of communication. If you would find a pairing thread helpful, I can spin one up, but it seems like you've been able to communicate on your own, and I think you'll probably get away with that this week too. But it's been really cool to see all the work, like really cool. Those Figma designs get me excited, and Figma designs never get me excited. So nice work.
normally because you're the one that has to go
Yeah,
implement them.
yeah, that's right. Usually it's like, oh no, all these issues I gotta write. But yeah, no, it's been cool.
I wanted to ask about that. I would imagine it would depend on what company you're in and the size of the company, but to what extent has your employment, have you had to translate the designs into an issue? Like how involved do you get with the design? Or is that like even portioned out to like a marketing / web developer? Like how does that work in the world?
I can comment about my team. We meet twice a week with our designer for our features, and at the beginning of kind of some work on a feature, we have some acceptance criteria nailed down, but no designs yet. And so we start talking about on those calls what the acceptance criteria looks like. And there's a lot of input from what product wants out of it. And there's a lot of input of what engineering can actually do. And we go back and forth a lot. And then once we get the acceptance criteria down, we start working with design. And as we're implementing the designs, things will come up and we say, hey, we found an error case, and we start talking about it with design, something that was missed in the original thing. And so on the call, the designer will usually open up Figma and start kind of like whiteboarding things a little bit. And we talk about like different flows and like, oh, what happens this? But like, like, oh, what if we accidentally clear the user's clipboard when they copy this string to their clipboard? Like, like considerations like that, and get all the way down to kind of whiteboarding something out together. But that's just one way we do it. And then after that call, we kind of have an idea of what needs to be done, and someone writes up an issue for it, and we take that issue and revise the actual product in the code. That's how my team does it. But I'm sure if we had a dozen developers on this call, you might get a dozen different answers. So
Yeah, I suspect so.
It is a collaboration. Sometimes design doesn't always have the full context of how the feature needs to work, or the different, the various paths through the feature, and so it sometimes takes a little bit of coordination.
I can give you multiple examples of how we work. It also depends on how you designers want to work, and just a bit like how the org is set up. I've been in situations where the designer would have, like I wouldn't see a lot of the stuff until it's like high fidelity, ready mock-ups where the designer would actually went in and draw the guidelines in every single, like how many pixels between things. And this, I think this designer didn't use Figma, because in Figma you can go in and see the numbers, but it was a different one. So he had like all the guidelines written in there. He had the whole design system. He split a lot of the things up, and like it can be handed to you in that way. And then I also get the other side, which is the recent project that I'm working on, is we got wireframes. It's because designers, they're working on multiple things at the same time, and they only have enough time to think about the workflow of this particular piece that I'm working on, because it's smaller and more supposedly straightforward. So we get the wireframes, and then, you know, we use empty design libraries. So for me as a front-end engineer, I kind of took their wireframes and make some decisions for them. But it's with understanding that we have check-in points of like when we do an internal release, and then after the internal release, there's potentially a design review, where sometimes as you're building things, you realize like some flows are kind of awkward. So I think as a front-end engineer, you tend to have more freedom to mess with that a little bit and kind of suggest things. And then again, the communication with each other and with design, it's always helpful to have conversations, say, hey, this is what I have so far. What do you think? Kind of like having the demo, like the importance of demoing today, even though you're not ready, is to say, this is where I am today. What do you think? How can I change this? How can we make this better? And then sometimes design, once they had a chance to really like think about the final thing, or they see things moving around, they realize that it's really awkward. Their initial design of wireframe was awkward, right? So they came back and like with something completely, like the UI is so much simpler, but code wise, you're like, oh, it's a bit of a lift to like adjust that, which is okay. You know, you factor that in as well. So then that's kind of like my busy week this past week, is like, now I have to do that big lift of changing all that. But you reach the end goal of like, this is usable, it's also pretty, and then like it's functional. So again, that loop happens. So it's really important to get to know your designers and work with them closely, especially if you're on the front end.
You're not having to design necessarily in a company.
Sometimes we get to.
Sometimes, but it almost,
Yeah.
it never looks quite as good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So they'll come in
It's
and
always
tell
like a
you,
developer did that.
yeah, changes a little bit, and then sometimes they're like, oh, that looks good. But you can do minor little things where, like, say that orange button that you're really like, yeah, you want to suggest it. So there are times when we make certain decisions, and it feels really good to hear from a designer like, hey, that looks good, go ahead. And it's like, really great.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so it can happen, and you can leverage that. Some designers want to work with developer who care about usability and have an eye for design, because it makes things a lot faster.
In my company where I work now, it's organized like web is under marketing, and then they have a separate bank of engineers that do other things. So it's confusing to me, being new in the industry, like how that is split out and how the roles are different.
We have something kind of similar. Like we have a web team that does our marketing site and manages all of that content. And then we have other web engineers that work on like our web app, like what you might've interacted when you signed up and did all that process. So those are two different teams, and there's some overflow there, some communication between things, but for the most part, they're working on their own updates and a lot of redesigns and things like that on the marketing side, and new features and things like that on our side.
I think that makes it more clear, like the marketing site versus the actual product.
Mhm.
That was a connect I didn't get before. Thanks.
Mhm. Cool. That was a good call. I can't believe our next call is our last call, right? Am I crazy? Yeah, I think so.
It's terrifying and exciting.
And sad. Don't forget sad.
Sad too.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing all the stuff, all the hard work this week. If you need any, I mean, not that I would imagine you need any reviews, but if you do, feel free to ping us or just help or feedback on anything. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to seeing the work. It'll be cool. Very exciting.
Cool.
Keep up the good work, everybody.
All
Good
right.
work.
See ya.
Have a
Yeah.
great Sunday.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.